Hello again. Welcome to RP-0 America. I'm starting from the interplanetary craft that I used in my last series in 1.0.5. I think it was courtesy of Shabs. And let's see. It's not a terribly heavy craft, but it does have... Oh, actually, I might be able to improve on that. Let's see. What do we have? Hydrazine, and I can use higher tech hydrazine, which is awesome. And yeah, those tanks are good. Got hydrazine in them. But anyway, yeah, it has a little bit of delta V on its own, which is handy. I don't think it's quite enough to park it into a Venus orbit or anything like that, but it's enough to finish off a final burn out of the solar system and other things. But it's definitely a really great little craft. So I'm going to kind of show you the process I used. Ready, fail. Come on. So where's the core here? Let me just set a nice easy core part that I can grab onto. No, won't let me grab the antenna. Okay, what about just this upper? There we go. That's good enough. That's a good enough root part for me. All right, so I'm going to assemble it from some sub-assemblies I set aside. So I'm just going to grab my handy old Agena B, which I might later modify into a D, but you know, that's not too huge of a difference. Just throwing on it, you know, just switching the tank really, and just selecting. I'll probably leave this engine. We'll have to see. How I refine the design. The only real difference, so I've got an update of, I think it was Test Flight, finally helped them find a bug. I just described it, and then finally Agathorn and Nathan Kell found the bug. But see here, you can see rated burn time, 4 minutes, 4 minutes. So if I select that one, so you can see the lowest one has a rated burn time of 2 minutes, and then that one has 4 minutes, and that one also is rated for 4 minutes. So being rated for 4 minutes, that will kind of limit how big I could make this stage. Also, you are crazy. There we go. Okay, yeah, good. So now you can see all the delta V. So yeah, rated for 4 minutes. So pretty much that's already what this is. Rated for 4 minutes. So now let me show first. So first I started with this. So ultimately, pull out my TI-30XA, which is lovely. So I'm going to need about 9,500 meters per second to get to orbit. Oh, come on game. There we go. And let me just throw a decoupler in there so I can calculate. Oops. Parts, decoupler. Okay. And at this stage in my planning, I don't care what it looks like. I'm just trying to get the delta V right, the stage, just the math right. So this is the first stage I used on that sounding rocket. With just a single Saturn 1 H1B. So you've got a letter H1, just the basic one, short 2.5 minute rated burn time. That's why it's got enough thrust to take off the ground. It's good. And so with the delta V of that stage plus this, it gives me that, which would get me to, so 9,500 gets me to orbit, leaves me with 1,000 meters per second left over, which if I look at that, that's going to be 500 meters per second in Agena, and then 500 meters per second in this. So not enough to leave the system, because I believe it's 3.5 kilometers per second I need in order to just get the flyby of Venus. So if I add those together, 9,500, so my target is about 13,000 delta V. So nowhere near that. So this design isn't going to do it. So after that, I said, okay, well, clearly need more. I can't stretch this for multiple reasons. I can't just make this longer for many. So let's say if I made this longer, so I'm lowering my sea level thrust, which is still okay, but I'm now exceeding the rated burn time. So even though this says, okay, I'm going to get more delta V, this engine's going to fail, very likely to fail, before I actually burn that whole time. So, okay, I need to shift things differently. I could select other engines, but just as part of the fiddling process, I would say, all right, let's try 2 engines. So 2 engines, bam, rated burn time is now well below, sea level thrust is very high, so okay. So just for the sake of fiddling with the numbers, let's just stretch this tank like mad until we get to about 2.5 minute burn time again. Okay, so we're at 2.5 minute burn time. Sea level thrust is above 1, well above 1. It's really high. And I'm still not at the amount of delta V I need. I've got more, but this is still the same stage, this is still the same payload, and so I've added tons of thrust, but ultimately that isn't going to get me there either. Just stretching the first stage isn't going to do it. So, all right, so I have to take another tack. So also, I don't know, here let me just quickly fiddle through these, all the stats. Okay, good, so this will show So 2.5 minute burn. I start at 1.5 thrust. Now, when this stage burns out, it's going to be at a huge thrust to weight ratio. Hold on a second. All right, there we go. Okay, so when this first stage burns out, this is a big window to leave open all the time. So understandably, I don't, but it's useful info, and I'll explain how I sometimes end up using it and what it ends up meaning to you. So when this starts, it's a acceptable surface thrust to weight ratio, but high. But when it burns out, it's at a huge thrust to weight ratio. That's like above the thrust to weight ratio of the Sputnik, which just had like the empty core tank and engine and tiny satellite once it reached orbit. So that tells us we're not throwing enough weight. Like the reason we're not getting more delta V for what we add here is because our upper stage or stages are just underweight. So that's what this number tells me. I'm hitting way too high of a thrust. Max sea level thrust. That's kind of, I prefer it tells me the max real thrust, because it's actually going to be way higher than that, because I'm going to burn out. Oh yeah, there it is. Max thrust to weight ratio 15, so huge. All right, so let me just go back to the tiny stats I had there. So that's usually enough for me. Also, I'm a little bit of outside of avionics, but if I was happy with everything else, I would really just do that. There, boom, avionics are happy. Or if you don't mind cheating ever so slightly, you could just live with the fact that for the first couple seconds after you launch, you're not going to have avionics control. Then it's going to do, I think it does a check once a second. Once you fall below that mass, once you've burned off enough fuel, you'd have control. I do that sometimes as well. Okay, so follow with my logic here. So I had just pasted that stage on. In practice, while I was just fiddling, I would have been more like, oh, come on. Those are gone. Imagine those are gone. I would have just been like this and ignored the avionics. Really, I just throw in the avionics at the end when I'm starting to get happy with my design. It's, it's a process of refinement. So, okay. So I'm going to need more weight. Can I make this stage bigger, right? Here's the kind of the flow chart of my thinking. This is telling me I need heavier upper stage. Can I just make this upper stage bigger? And in this case, the answer was no, because this is already at the rated burn time I told you about here. Goodbye, Shroud. So the rated burn time for this engine is 4 minutes. I already have it be a little bit beyond that rated burn time. Okay, fair enough. So that means I need an intermediate stage, right? If I still need more delta V, this is pushing me too much. So I just set you, actually I'm just going to throw you away because I have a better version where I didn't just stretch it. Kicking around somewhere else. Oof, I hate that. So usually I just click somewhere here to get rid of a stage, but if you haven't unlocked a part, just clicking doesn't get rid of the stage. Don't ask me why, it's just, I don't know if it's a glitch, it's just user interface wise, a pain in my butt. So what I did was I grabbed, so I could just use a procedural tank, and that's what sane people should probably do while you're learning. If you really like to build your own rockets in RP-0, like own tanks and everything, then yeah, just throw in a procedural part like that. What engine do I already have unlocked from before? Well, I have this, so I use this to place a payload on the moon. So this is the for context, it's the second stage. Oh, I also wish this little info window would pop over the other interface windows so I could read it, because it only shows sometimes. So when I have it up, I probably want to be able to read it. But currently MechJeb pops under it. And same with that avionics window. Okay, so it's the second stage of the Titan 2. Technically the default config here, so it says burns kerosene. That one is the second stage of the Titan 1 engine, but this is the second stage of the first Titan 2, and then that gives you a slightly better Titan 2. So if I hover, what's the difference? It goes from a 3-minute rated burn time to a 3.5-minute rated burn time. That's the only difference, and the $200 price difference. So also, will it not? No, it won't let me do that. So I've selected the -5 version, and if I center click it, I can see I have the -5 version, bunch of specs right there, but flight data. So I have used this before because I have more than 0 flight data. Okay, so now let me just right click this, tell it to fill with the appropriate fuel. At least the way the interface looks to me, I believe it's always the bottom one is the bottom engine. It's kind of adds this list starting from the top of the craft going down, looking at engines. So I generally just start with the bottom button for fuel. That's kind of how I quickly get to it. So if I look at this engine again, it tells me rated burn time at 3 minutes, so this tank is too big. Okay, so let's make it a little smaller diameter, make it a little shorter. So there we go. So that gets me to, actually I probably don't want it to have a smaller diameter, just because this engine has a tank butt, unfortunately. One of the things we're moving away from in future engine designs, and we prefer people don't have a big, so we call this a tank butt because it's got, basically this big flat section here is the butt of a tank, and it makes it so that I couldn't, for instance, it would look really dumb if I made this tank smaller than this tank butt. Okay, so basically this gives me the delta V I would want, and actually to find the numbers from it I need to, okay good, I have a decoupler in there. And just to see the numbers, that's how I would do it. So there we go. Those two upper stages are going to deliver me that delta V. So now I just need, I could have just set aside the first stage if I was considering using it. In practice, I already created a subassembly, the 2H1. I usually code a little bit of info and things, just like you've seen with my Kerbal alarm clock. Like I code, what's the name? So it's a window to Venus, it's and it's this amount of delta V. So just quick little numbers. So that's the price, like you usually just say actual price, and the mass of the stage. Because for some reason it doesn't show, it could potentially show information when you hover over it or right click on it, or no. I tried because for all I know it did have that info. But I just code that info into the details there. All right, so I've got this constructed. I need to kind of create a standard where I do or don't include decouplers. Oh, right, for that it looks nice to have the decoupler that matches it. Okay, so click that on, and I happen to have made it the same diameter as that. So all right, so now let's take a look at some of the details here. So are my engines staged correct? So the numbers are meaningful. So those two engines will light, then it will separate, and then my second stage will go, and then my third stage will go. Good. So all the staging is in a sane order, so these numbers are meaningful. All right, so thrust to weight ratio at the ground is good, not bad at all. The lowest I will usually go is 1.15 because that's what the Saturn V had, and the Saturn V was a proven functioning craft. So that's what I'll get out of delta V for it. And if you're constructing this, right, you'd want to make sure, okay, rated time 2.5 minutes. Indeed, fits 2.5 minutes. And I haven't modified these stages, so good. The second stage is within the limitations of the engine. Same with the third stage. And there we go. So I'm above my magic delta V number of 13 kilometers. So that is 13 kilometers per second, or 13,000 meters per second. So actually that's a pretty good balance, because that means when these three stages have burned out, so in practice now I kind of have to think about the staging. So first stage will burn out, will I be in orbit? No. Okay, so second stage will light. After those two burn out, I would just literally pull up my handy Texas Instruments calculator, or just kind of eyeball it. Okay, how much delta V will I have burned at that point? I will have burned 7,810. Will I be in orbit? No. So this stage is going to have to expand in another ignition to place me in orbit. Makes sense. So if I right click on this, does it show me? No, it doesn't show me the info I want. So I have to go here to see, and it doesn't give you the detail of your current engine when you hover over it. I kind of wish it did. So let me just select away to a different engine. Now if I hover over it, it tells me I have 2 ignitions. So that means if this engine has to burn once to place me in orbit, 2 ignitions means I have 1 ignition remaining. Is that enough? In this case, yes, because I'm going to spend the rest of that delta V to throw me towards Venus. So there we go. That's exactly fine with me. Just make sure that you've checked that you have enough ignitions, because an engine like this with 1 ignition would not do the job for me. It would place it in orbit, and then all of the rest of that delta V would effectively be meaningless and wasted because I don't have an attached engine to do that. And I've done crazy, fun designs to get around that, like having, let's say, 3 engines on a stage that only have 1 ignition. So I have 2 at the edges that burn to get me into orbit, and then the center one wasn't expended to get to orbit, and then I use it to do the later burn. Crazy fun things. You can make crazy rockets in Realism Overhaul and RP-0 as well, but that is not what I've done in this design. But I've done it before, and it's fun. And don't let anybody complain if you find it fun, because that's why you play games. Okay, so this rocket would do the job for me then. So that's what I would do if I was going with procedural parts. The only difference I would personally make is I would use a fuel tank. Now, I used this fuel tank, the Titan II upper stage engine, on a previous rocket, therefore I have it unlocked. Now, what's kind of a pain is I could just build any procedural part of almost arbitrary dimensions here. Like, the only real limitation is, say, diameter, depending on my tech. So right now I can only go, quote-unquote, only go to that diameter of tank. Okay, but it's not going to cost me anything to unlock it. Whereas if I want to unlock a slightly different tank for a second stage, like this one, so see the difference, 22,000, 22,000 liters or 22 kiloliters. That one is quite similar, etc. So it would cost me, I'd have to unlock it. So I kind of wish these were basically nil. These were pretty much nothing, but fair enough. Also, the avionics on that part looks like it's broken because it was certainly not used on a rocket that was big. That was that big. Oh, it's 1,000.0. Okay, so it's the sig figs that are showing crazy. I don't think we need .000 tons. Okay. But so that's kind of a pet peeve. I kind of wish I could just get some of these tanks for a reduced price or nearly nothing. But because I already paid for this, because I just like the look of them, even though I'd rather things were balanced a little differently, that's the tank I would use. And then I just have to shuffle around my staging a little bit. Oh, no, I need to just fill you with kerosene, question mark. I must have done something. Oh, no. Right, it's because I have everything assembled. So it's detecting that engine at the bottom. So kerosene is the engine at the bottom. Then this is the second stage engine, so it's the second line here. There we go. And I get pretty much the same numbers I got, slightly less there. So the last thing I want to check with my craft before I actually use it is avionics. So avionics are okay at this stage, so I have enough. So that means some part of my craft has it built in. So now if I pretend like I staged there, does this part of the craft have enough avionics? Yes, it's still happy. I remove that. Yes, it's happy. Good. And then same thing up there. I know. Oh, there we go. Good. I learned something. This does not have enough avionics, so I would need to pull out some fuel, question mark, or add on a little more avionics. So it looks like I'd want to pull out some fuel, or, I'll have to do some tweaking of that. But yeah, you want to check to make sure each of your stages has enough avionics. You can do that in the VAB here. I also tend to do a test flight as well to verify. But anyway, now if I go look in the pre-baked oven, I basically did this exact thing, except I don't know if I noticed that issue with avionics. I have the 1.1 Venus flyby probe. And I believe I did this whole video in the VAB, so you haven't seen it yet, but Kerbal alarm clock. So I'm 265 days away from the next Venus window. Okay, and this will show me, so that's the second line. So if I use the first production line for rockets, that's how long it will take to build. So I could get this done before the Venus window approaches, which is great. I have some future upcoming technology that will let me make potentially a better rocket, maybe a heavy lift or reliable enough that it can place a payload into Venus orbit. But no promises, but I will be hoping to be able to build something like that before the Venus window approaches. And like the Soviets and Americans before me, it tends to be a good idea to try to send 2 probes towards any interplanetary window. If you plan to send 1, you should probably send 2, because there is a good chance that 1 will fail. Also, if both succeed, you can give them different missions. It's a very good strategy. So there we go. So I've got it all designed. In practice with this one, something was slightly different, I think. So I put a couple of avionics rings on the bottom here to make sure my avionics were okay. Because usually I would put them in here, and then I would use the movement to grab this and put it up basically to hide those avionics units, because that's just the best way to do things visually right now. But in this case, that gave me some weird KJR, didn't cover up a wobble. And so rather than figuring that out, because, nearly done the craft, I just threw them on the base there. Yeah, this is the my candidate craft to do my first flyby of Venus. And I took you through the whole design process. It's partially custom, partially existing bits, but I showed you the logic of how I end up at a design like this, right? And process will vary. Other people, I'm sure, you will develop a different strategy than me for designing custom rockets. Other people probably have other strategies and techniques as well. But that was something I wanted to present, was how I design a custom rocket, and I will do a few more videos of this later on when I'm designing heavier and heavier lift rockets, like a Saturn I or a Saturn IB counterpart, up through everything bigger. So thanks for watching. That was RP-0 America. And in the next video, I will probably be, after I've refined this a little bit, doing a test flight of it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.